Everything on this channel is fast. I talk fast. We make fast-paced videos with a lot of information fit into a short time, usually less than 15 minutes. And, making videos like that makes for quick, snappy content. But this is an education channel, and cramming a lot of information into a short time, that's probably not the best way to communicate complicated information, like building a piece of furniture. So, how about this week? Let's do it differently. Let's slow it down. Okay, maybe not that slow. Today, we're going to start a simple end table in the shaker style, and we'll do the build in 2 parts. This week, we're going to make it work. Next week, we're going to make it pretty. Here's the goal. A basic table looks good in pretty much any home. Instead of throwing on a bunch of decoration, we'll use contrasting woods for visual interest. This project might seem advanced, but tables are surprisingly simple. Here, let's get rid of that top. See? It's just 4 legs and 4 aprons. That's the whole thing. And there is so little wood in a table like this, you can almost build it from scraps. I'll make the top and legs out of figured maple. And I need the legs to be around 1.5 inches square. The lumber yard didn't have anything that thick, but that's okay. Modern wood glue makes it possible to just glue up thinner boards. That's a big glue joint, so let it dry overnight. In the meantime, you can make the top. I've chosen my most figured piece of wood for the top, and left the plainer stuff for the legs. We'll need a tight glue joint, but I do most of the edge work with my aggressive 4-plane, getting as close as possible before I switch to my finer tri-plane. Use your coarsest tool for as long as you can. That's an efficient way to work by hand. If you like these wooden planes I'm using, you can build them both from spare parts and scrap. I've got a video and plans, and I will link to those down in the description. Once you have 2 jointed edges, stack your boards and check for light between them. You can also use a straight edge to make sure both faces are in the same plane. They don't have to be perfect, but the closer you get them, the less work you have after the glue dries. Make sure you have glue covering the whole joint, but don't overdo it. Excess glue just makes things slippery. I want the joint to close up and look tight with a single clamp in the middle, but a single clamp will make the top cup. You can equalize that pressure with a clamp on either end applied from the other side. I've left the top oversized for the glue up, but you want to trim away all the excess wood before you plane it. There's no point in planing material that you're just going to cut off anyway. The underside of my top is pretty uneven, but working it diagonally with the 4-plane takes off the bumps fast. You won't get it perfectly flat, but rotating the board 180 degrees will cancel out inaccuracies in your planing and get you very close. Again, stick with the 4-plane as long as you can, and just use the tri-plane for the final flattening. Since this is the underside, there's no reason to smooth plane it, so I'll stop after it's flat. I'll do the same thing to the top side, and stop after the tri-plane. The final smoothing comes at the end of the build, and this maple already looks pretty good. Now, let's turn those leg blanks into legs. Start by squaring up one edge with the tri-plane, and then use that reference edge to run a cut line. Keeping this long rip cut straight can be a challenge, so make it easier by angling the saw to track the line and establish a good kerf. Then level off to saw through the bulk of the wood. You can alternate like this, angling the saw to stay on the line, and then straightening out as you progress through the cut. This maple isn't easy to handsaw, but persistence will get you there. Then you can give your legs a quick squaring. I roughed out the other legs on the bandsaw. I've got an old elbow injury that decided to flare up this week. As much as I like doing things by hand, I like finishing my projects even more. So I'll still use a machine if that's what it takes. One of the ways we make handwork efficient is by focusing on our reference surfaces. So here's a leg, and these 2 surfaces here, these are my show surfaces. They're going to be on the outside. They need to look flat and straight, but they don't have to be perfect. I don't have to drive myself crazy making them exact. Now, these 2 inside surfaces, that's where I'm going to put the mortises and all the joinery. So these surfaces need to be perfectly flat, perfectly straight, and exactly perpendicular to each other. But I'm also going to be tapering the insides of the legs in a later step. That means I really only have to focus on the top 4 or maybe 6 inches, right where the joints are going to go. The rest of these surfaces are going to get cut away later. Before I can mark out my joinery, I also need my apron stock. The bandsaw saves my elbow for this long rip cut, and I can square the whole thing while it's still one piece. I need square cuts on the ends, so I'll use my shooting board. It's got a detachable arm to support long stock and a fence that helps guide my saw. Once my aprons are cut, I'll smooth plane one face and double check that I have a reference edge. Then I make an edge mark pointing toward my show face. These aprons are really just like the legs. I need a flat reference face to the outside like this, and a reference edge that's going to go on top. Now, this lower edge is going to be visible in the final piece, so I need it to look straight, but it doesn't need to be perfect or perfectly square. And then the inside face, I'm not going to do anything to. I'm going to leave it just like it came from the mill. Now, this is a labor-saving technique, but it has another benefit. I've just got this one little mark on the edge to tell me which face is my reference face. That could get rubbed off during the building process. Well, I don't need to do a bunch of guesswork to figure out which face is which. If I just run my fingers down them, it's instantly obvious. This is the rough inside face, this is the smooth reference face. I can always get my bearings just by touching the piece. Now, all my parts are made. Let's mark out the joints. I've got all my legs with one reference face up, and I'm striking a line an inch from the top. That's called a horn, and it protects the end of the leg. We'll saw that off toward the end of the build. We also don't want this mortise coming all the way up through the end of the leg. That would weaken things a lot. So we're going to come down about 1/4 of an inch. You can just eyeball it. Then I'll use my apron to find the end of each mortise and mark that. Now, we're going to locate our mortise and our tenon at the same time. Stand an apron up on a leg and move it around until you get a reveal that you like. Then, grab your mortise chisel, put it in the middle of your apron stock, and press a deep mark into the leg. Then, take your knife and transfer that mark to your apron. I've carried my layout lines around to my other reference face, and I'm setting my homemade mortise gauge to the chisel mark I just made. After I gauge my first mortise, I flip the leg so that I'm always holding the gauge against a reference face. Then I mark the other mortise. Then I repeat this for all the other legs. Mortising is much easier if the work is held steady. My joiner's bench has a planing stop to hold the end of the piece, and I can use a holdfast to hold it down. I covered mortising in a lot of detail 2 weeks ago, and you can check that video out for a full review of my technique. I also cut a quick test tenon out of pine, and that lets me check my mortise for depth. Oh, and you're probably wondering about this mallet. This is a split head cast iron mallet with replaceable raw head faces. I got it because a lot of the time when I'm mortising with a regular wooden mallet, I have to swing the mallet a little bit harder than I want to. It's tough on my arm. This mallet is so heavy that I pretty much just lift it up and let it drop onto the chisel. It's really effective that way, and using this kind of mallet let me chop all 8 of the mortises for this project, even though my elbow was bothering me. It didn't make things any worse, so it was really effective. I will link to this tool down in the description. Now you can chop all of the mortises one after another. When you go to lever out the waste, push all you want on that top edge. No one's going to see that, but the bottom edge will be visible. I like to leave a fat 1/4 inch of waste in front of that edge so that I have something to pry against. Once my mortise is down to full depth, I stand my chisel plumb and take little bites right up to my knife line. All my mortises are done. Now let's make the tenons. Remember that little mark we made with the knife? We're going to use that to set our mortise gauge and strike those lines all around the ends of the apron. Remember to only reference your gauge against the outside reference face of the apron. It's handy to run a pencil through those lines too. It makes them really stand out. I want my tenons to be 1 inch long, so I'll just put my 1-inch chisel against the end and make a tick with my knife. I'll use that mark to align my square, scribe the line with several light passes of the knife, and then carefully carry those lines around the apron. The tenon shoulder on my show face needs to be very crisp, so I'm going to chisel a little trench to guide my tenon saw. I carefully saw a little bit at one end of the line, a little bit at the other end, and I connect those 2 cuts into a smooth line. Once the kerf is established, I intentionally tilt the saw so that I'm undercutting the shoulder. That'll make more sense in a minute. For the inside shoulder that won't be seen, I'll put my saw right on my knife line and saw straight down. This will also make more sense in a minute. Over Over at the vise, I have the apron at a 45-degree angle. I can put the saw right on my gauge line and pull back to get started. This angle makes it easy to track two lines at once as I work down to my shoulder cut. Then I flip the piece and do the same thing on the other side. This technique gives me clean lines, but it leaves a triangle of waste in the middle of the joint. So finish your angle cuts and then pinch the apron right in the middle and let it hang plumb as you tighten the vise again. Now you can saw down the tenon cheek and get rid of that waste inside. Your tenon is going to need some extra trimming. I like to keep it vertical in the vise so I can sight down from above and see extra material sticking up from the surface. This is a good time to use your widest chisel. Now we're going to fit that tenon into a mortise. Our mortise is a little shorter than our tenon, so we need to cut away a little notch. This is often called a haunch. No need to measure, just mark it and saw off the extra material. People will often tell you that you can't trim the long sides of a mortise, but I find that unrealistic. When you're cutting this joint by hand, there are all sorts of opportunities to get things a little bit tilted or maybe a little bit curved. For instance, this is probably the worst mortise I cut. I must have drifted off my line a little bit because there's a little extra material on this side and a little hollow on the other side. Shit happens. It's nothing to get upset about. Grab your widest chisel and trim that thing square. Yes, the mortise is now a tiny bit wider, but I just cut the tenon a little bit fat or trim it a little bit less, and I'm going to get a perfectly good fit. Now that the tenon is in there, let's look at the fit and see why we cut it the way we did. This is the show surface, and it's got a lovely, tight line against the leg. That's why we undercut that shoulder. The edge of the shoulder is the only thing touching the side of the leg. The corner isn't touching because we angled the saw. And because we sawed the other shoulder right on the line, it isn't touching either. So we get a tight joint where it counts and very little trimming. But hold on a second. Don't we need both of these shoulders touching the edges of the mortise to get a solid joint? Well, actually we don't. There's very little glue area on these shoulders, and it's all end grain, which means it would make a very weak connection. With a mortise and tenon, all the actual action is happening inside the joint, where these big, long grain faces are contacting the inside walls of the mortise and getting bonded with the glue. That's where all the structure of the joint is. These shoulders don't contribute very much to the strength of the joint, so we might as well cut them to make them look good. When you've cut both mortises, your tenons are going to hit each other inside the joint. We'll fix that by mitering the tips. No need to measure anything. Just freehand in a few pencil lines and cut away that corner. You just need to take off a little material. As you fit each tenon into its mortise, you should number the joints. A straight chisel will easily make Roman numerals. Here, I'm marking a numeral 4, and I'll put that mark next to the mortise too. Once all 8 joints are fitted and numbered, you're ready for the test assembly. Your joints should be a pretty snug fit, so a bar clamp is the perfect thing to gently squeeze the whole assembly together. If it stands up on its own without any glue, then you cut some good joints, and the final table should be strong. Just for fun, let's throw the top on there and get a sense of the finished piece. Doesn't look like much, does it? With these blocky, untrimmed legs and plain top, your table might look a little bit uninspiring. But that doesn't matter right now. We've created the structure of a good piece, and everything else is just details. Next week, we're going to turn this plain Jane table into something really nice by tapering the legs, beveling the top, and gluing everything together. The finished piece is going to be something special. All the hard work is already done. If you'd like more of, well, me, you can listen to my appearance on the Creativity Podcast. It's the place where art and engineering meet, and I think I'm the first woodworker they ever had on. It was a great conversation, and you can listen to it or watch it on YouTube. I will put the links down in the description. This video also featured a bunch of tools and shop-made jigs and fixtures. When you build stuff like this for yourself, you can save a lot of money, and it's a great learning experience. I have videos and plans to guide you through everything you see in this video, and I will link to those down in the description as well. Just like always, these videos would not be possible without my patrons on Patreon. And you can go over to patreon.com/RexKruger and check out all of the early access, exclusive content, and rewards that I give to the people who make this stuff possible. I'll be back next week with all the finishing touches on this fantastic table. I really hope you'll join me. Remember to hit that bell icon so you don't ever miss a video. And just like always, thanks so much for watching.